the air tonight with the key witness in the case against the president's son taking the stand, his former sister-in-law and former ex-girlfriend, in clearly emotional testimony detailing both of their addictions and what may be a major blow to the defense. We're live at court. Then more rare tornadoes threatening Maryland again tonight after several ripped through multiple states, including one in Michigan, hitting with no warning. The forecast and the danger zone just ahead. And we'll explain the pretty shocking reversal from the FDA for one of the country's most popular vape companies, plus what a new study says about sugar-free gum and whether it's actually okay for your health. Plus, why the Biden administration is getting ready to take on the biggest alcohol distributor in the country later in the show. Hey, I'm Hallie, and tonight, gut-wrenching testimony, highly anticipated testimony from the prosecution's star witness in the historic case against the president's son. Want to show you here Hunter Biden in just the last couple of minutes walking out of court. There he is with his wife. You see him leaving in just the last little bit in Wilmington. That's after Hallie Biden took the stand. She's the widow of Hunter's brother, Beau, and she dated Hunter after Beau died. Acknowledging today on the stand, she ended up involved with crack herself, but has been clean for years since then, since her involvement with Hunter. Prosecutors think Hallie Biden is the one who can directly connect the dots between Hunter Biden's drug addiction and the gun they say he illegally bought when he checked a box in 2018 saying he was not an addict at the time. The timeline is going to be critical here. The timeline is super important, so let's walk you through it here. I want to show you here on screen. Hunter Biden, this starts, remember, October 2018. This is the critical time because that's when he bought the gun. He went back to Delaware from L.A. on October 6th of that year, according to his lawyer. That's because he and Hallie Biden were going to rehab together at a facility not far from Wilmington. Less than a week later, on October 12th, Hunter Biden bought the gun at the center of the case. That's key. His defense team argues he did not consider himself an addict at the time. Now, the next day, I'm going to show you October 13th. He sends a text to Hallie Biden saying he's waiting for, I'm quoting, a dealer named Mookie in Wilmington. And the day after that, he sends her another text writing he was sleeping in his car smoking crack. Now, Hallie Biden testified today that on October 23rd, she found trash, clothes, remnants of crack, and that gun in Hunter Biden's car, the gun at the center of this case. You're about to see the video of the moment Hallie Biden says she panicked and threw the gun away in a trash can outside a grocery store that same day because she says she didn't want Hunter Biden to hurt himself or for her kids to find it and hurt themselves. That day, Hallie Biden texted Hunter Biden, check yourself into a local rehab, saying this has to stop. Our team inside court telling us that as Hallie spoke, Hunter was watching very carefully. With all of it happening, as President Biden now says in a new interview out tonight that he will not pardon his son if he's convicted and that he'll accept the outcome of the trial however it goes. Mike Medley is outside court in Wilmington, Delaware. Danny Savalos has our legal breakdown here. Ma'am, give us a sense of what it was like inside the room, because Hallie Biden also testified about how there were times when Hunter Biden seemed to be in denial about his addiction. She is critical to the prosecution's case here. Was it effective?
Yeah, Hallie is the most critical part of the prosecution's case because she can take us into that October timeline. We've heard mounds of evidence introduced over the previous 2 days, photos, text messages, Hunter Biden's own words in his audiobook to demonstrate the prosecution's argument that Hunter, which the defense is not really disputing, was in the depths of addiction over the course of a long period of time. The question was he addicted when he bought the gun in October of 2018? Well, Hallie brings us to that timeline. And it was interesting during the time I was in the courtroom, she was clearly uncomfortable. This is an uncomfortable moment for the family. When Abby Lowell, the defense attorney, was cross-examining her, she was really struggling to recall specific moments in time. He asked her if text messages were refreshing her memory. As Abby Lowell said to her at one point, it's difficult to rebuild this timeline, isn't it? And she said yes. But what those text messages indicate is really at the heart of the defense's case, that he was potentially, if his texts were truthful, using drugs within days of purchasing that gun. The thing that the defense attorney is trying to argue, and this is an interesting defense, is he was simply lying to Hallie Biden because, as he was trying to argue, she was asking where he was because she thought perhaps he might have been seeing another woman at the time.
Danny, let me go to you here because there is a question mark. Is what Hallie Biden testified today to, is it a smoking gun in your view?
It is and it isn't. I mean, the prosecution has clearly proven that Hunter Biden was addicted to crack. They've clearly proven that he was erratic. He led this chaotic lifestyle. And they've done that through a number of witnesses, most of whom he had romantic relationships with. It's been a parade of Hunter Biden's past paramours. So have they succeeded in showing that he used a lot of crack? Yeah, I think they've shown that. But the defense has come up with a clever defense, which is you may have shown that Hunter Biden used crack, but number one, have you shown that he knowingly was an addict when he filled out the Form 4473 and therefore lied? And have you shown that he was an addict during the 10-day or 11-day period that he was actually in possession of this firearm? I think the prosecution has shown enough for a jury to infer that he was, but this defense is pretty clever, and they may be able to argue in closing that they don't have exact evidence of those moments in time.
You know, ma'am, Danny is talking about the ways in which the defense attorney here, Abby Lowell, who is conducting the cross-examination on behalf of Hunter Biden's team, tried to poke holes in this, tried to come up with examples and elucidate examples of how Hallie Biden maybe didn't remember certain things, saying, oh, so you don't recall that at different periods, trying to cast doubt on some of this. And as this was all happening, Hunter Biden, based on our team in court, was paying attention, right? I mean, give us some of the sense of that moment here. We know that the First Lady is in France. She has been at the Wilmington courthouse for the first 3 days of this trial, wasn't there today. She may be back, right? That's an open question. But in the meantime, Hunter Biden is surrounded by friends and family here.
Yeah, every single day we've seen some of the same, but a different rotating cast of people who are close to the family, some people who have been part of President Biden's political life over decades in representing Delaware in the Senate and since then. And today we saw the arrival of Valerie Biden Owens. That is President Biden's sister. She was his former campaign manager. She is a mainstay of family life for the entire Biden clan. And she took a red eye, as I was told by another family member from Los Angeles, just to be there. Now we understand the First Lady coming after less than 24 hours on the ground in France with her husband to be part of the D-Day commemorations, returning to Wilmington with plans to then return to Paris yet again on Saturday for that state dinner. This speaks to the way they want to be supportive of Hunter, but also to be supportive of the whole family. Remember, we're seeing both sets of parents of President Biden's grandchildren being put through this ordeal of having to testify against one another, and I think they want to be there as much as they can for the entire family.
Ma'am, do we get a sense that Hunter Biden may take the stand in his own defense? It would be, I assume, unlikely, but has Abby Lowell said either way?
What we've heard from Abby Lowell in the course of some of the opening statements and in pretrial motions is if Hunter were to testify X. So that speaks to the possibility being raised, but we got new indications as the trial was wrapping up for the day today. The prosecution saying they had just a few more witnesses to bring tomorrow. Then the defense will begin to be able to make its case. Abby Lowell saying he had maybe 2 to 3 witnesses, including potentially an expert. We also understand Naomi Biden, Hunter Biden's eldest daughter, may be one of those who testify, but no indication at this point that Hunter Biden himself would testify on his own defense.
So, Danny, that brings us to the timing here, because the prosecution whipped through a number of witnesses today. We know that the defense, based on what you've told us in the past, in many cases often will go shorter than the prosecution, since the burden of proof is, of course, on the prosecutors. What's your sense of timing on this? This was expected to be a fairly short-ish trial, a week plus. What do you think?
Oh, definitely. We're in federal court. Federal court always moves faster. This is a case where I think you might see some defense witnesses, but I don't see why they need to call Hunter Biden. I think maybe they call some precipient witnesses, people who may have seen Hunter during this time and said, oh, he was clean, which might help them show the jury that they can draw the inference that, hey, some days he had problems, but at the time he had the firearm, or at the time he filled out the form, that he was not, or not aware that he was an addict. So I think they might call a couple witnesses. Yeah. I don't think they're going to have a very long defense. And I don't think this is going to be a very long deliberation, because the issues are not particularly complex. You could see the jury doing this on the first round vote and probably arriving unanimity one way or the other.
Danny Savalos, Mike Memoli, much more to talk about in the days to come. Appreciate it from both of you. Thanks. Right now, some rare tornado warnings in Maryland. Yet again, you don't see it every day in that state, but here we are seeing it basically 2 days in a row, as a number of states are dealing with the aftermath of an incredibly severe storm system that whipped through multiple locations in Michigan, leaving a 2-year-old boy dead and his mother badly hurt. The fire chief in that Detroit suburb said this tree came crashing through the house because of 2 tornadoes that touched down there. The tree landed on a bed where they were sleeping. You can see the view, obviously, overhead here. It is horrific. We're told the tornado happened so suddenly there was just not a warning sign, enough of a warning sign, enough lead time, basically, to set those sirens off. We're seeing devastating stories like this one across multiple states. In Ohio, for example, thousands are in the dark after a tornado there. And then in Maryland, where emergency workers responded to reports of collapsed buildings, people trapped after a tornado hit. Out west, it is not the tornadoes, it is the heat baking them. Triple-digit temperatures, record highs in California, with at least 11 people getting heat exhaustion at a rally for former President Trump in Phoenix. We've got our team all over this for you. George Solis in Maryland, meteorologist Bill Cairns standing by. George, let me start with you. Talk to us about what folks there have seen and what they're bracing for next.
Yeah, Hallie, keep in mind, people here say this is not the Midwest, right? This is Gaithersburg, Maryland. They're used to seeing the occasional storm, nothing like what they saw last night. You can see cleanup here very much well underway. I can show you here. This is one of the homes that we saw in some of that video where one of those tree limbs completely crashed onto the roof. It has been chopped up here. What you hear now is the symphony of chainsaws and leaf blowers as the cleanup in this community continues, bringing some of those treetops right here down to the ground. Take a look at this car. This was completely destroyed by one of those trees, and bringing a little nature from those treetops a little closer to us here on the ground. We see some bugs and other creepy crawlies here that aren't welcome by the visitors. Fortunately, though, here, Hallie, amazingly, through all of this damage, no one was killed. We mentioned those family members that were trapped, all of them expected to survive. I actually spoke with one of the Good Samaritans who raced over as soon as they saw that tree collapse onto one of those homes, called 911, and went over to help. Here's what the young man told me.
I was definitely caught off guard at first, because usually you will never think it will be your house or any house in Gaithersburg for it to be a tornado. It was a wild experience, you know, just being in the moment, seeing the trees fall and just being able to react and go and call for help for our neighbors.
Yeah, Hallie, National Weather Service still surveying some of the damage out here. They believe around 2 of those twisters hit this area. Again, very unusual. Many here hoping they don't see a tornado like this for a very long time. Hallie?
No kidding. George Solis, thank you very much. Bill Cairns, let me bring you in. So is that it? Does the threat seem to be over? What's up with this warning here tonight?
Yeah, so we got isolated severe storms in the east again. Of course, yesterday we thought it was going to be isolated. It turned into a tornado outbreak. I mean, in whole, 22 tornadoes. You know, the horrible story we told you there with the fatality of the child outside the suburbs of Detroit. We also had 2 in Columbus. And then the Washington, D.C. area northwards. That's where, I mean, we had 2 supercell thunderstorms, like what we talk about in the plains or in the deep south, that produced all of these tornadoes, over a dozen yesterday. So for tonight and the rest of today, isolated severe storms. We're about more wind damage than anything else. This area of yellow is the slight risk, and that's pretty much where we have our severe thunderstorm watch up until 9 o'clock. Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, you look fine. Just a hit-and-miss showers. New York City, a couple more showers late tonight. It looks like from Richmond southwards, that's where we're tracking some of the strongest storms, and we only have 1 severe thunderstorm warning, gusts up to about 60 miles per hour are possible, and that's going to be heading over Interstate 85 here on the 295 just south of Richmond. And Richmond itself right now, heavy rain right during the rush hour. And as far as the heat goes, the peak is today and tomorrow. Over the weekend, it slowly cools back down. It's been gradually building all week long. And let's see who the hottest is right now. In Phoenix, you just hit 110. Vegas is at 109. So this is like middle of the summer type heat wave. This is early for this. And we do think it's still going to get warmer. I mean, it's only 2 o'clock in the afternoon in these areas. Phoenix up to 113 today. Vegas 111. Of course, we do it again tomorrow, but it also gets kind of widespread. Even areas of Colorado are going up near 100 degrees. Albuquerque, too. So, and then from there, as we go through the weekend, it goes back to where it should be for this time of year. Phoenix, you drop back down to the low 100s where it should be. Same for Palm Springs. But, yeah, people just don't want this to be what's going to happen the rest of the summer. And Hallie, I'm looking at the long range, trying to see what's happening.
Yeah, talk us through those trends we've been seeing.
Yeah, the trends look like it's going to switch. The West is actually going to cool off, and I hope everyone on the East Coast is ready for about a week from right now. I got a funny feeling I'm going to be talking about some pretty extreme heat as we head towards Father's Day weekend.
Well, yuck. And if you talk about heat, we've also got to look not just forward but backwards, Bill, because we're now learning that we have kept setting records for record heat.
Yeah.
Like month after month, it's worse and worse than the month before.
Okay, so we were in El Nino, plus we have man-made global warming that combined with it for this incredibly warm year last year. Now we're dropping El Nino and going towards a neutral, or what we call La Nina. So that's cooling of water in the Pacific. So we're waiting for our global temperatures to drop, and we're waiting for the oceans to drop and get cooler, because they should, because the El Nino's gone. And so far, it's not happening. A lot of scientists are like, okay, let's, what's going on here? We'll talk more about this in the months ahead.
Bill Cairns, appreciate you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Steve Bannon, now the former advisor to former President Trump, in just the last few hours walking out of court after being sentenced to report to prison in just a couple of weeks, or at least being told to go to prison, and saying that that is not going to silence him. Listen to this.
I've got great lawyers, and we're going to go all the way to the Supreme Court if we have to. There's nothing that can shut me up, and nothing that will shut me up. There's not a prison. There's not a prison. There's not a prison built. There's not a prison built or a jail built that will ever shut me up.
A feisty Steve Bannon there, a controversial figure, of course, host of that War Room show that is popular among the former president's allies and supporters. He's going to have to report to prison on July 1st. Interestingly, just 10 days before former President Trump himself will learn his own sentence. Remember, Bannon was found guilty on 2 counts of contempt of Congress for defying subpoenas from the January 6th committee. And if you're like, wait a second, Hallie, wasn't Bannon already sentenced to prison? Yeah, that happened like a year and a half ago. He appealed. That is what has brought us to today. NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard is joining us now from the rally where former President Trump himself is going to be at. And here we have yet again, Vaughn, a collision between the next election in 2024, obviously this year in November, and the last election, the fallout from that attack on the Capitol. And in this instance, a big supporter of the former president's refusing to cooperate with the congressional investigation.
Right. You said it, Hallie. Steve Bannon, since folks will recall, back in 2017, he was actually a chief strategist in the White House for about the first year before he left and took sort of an outside informal advisory role. But in the years since the January 6th attack, he has really become the preeminent voice of the MAGA movement, if you will, in the right-wing media ecosystem. His podcast not is only on radio, but it is also on streaming television. And he really has become the voice of the MAGA movement in a lot of ways beyond Donald Trump. And Donald Trump himself is not naive to that. And that's why just in the last few moments, Donald Trump, you're seeing him on stage here. We'll see if he actually makes any remarks about Bannon having to report to jail on July 1st. But on his way here to the event venue in Phoenix upon landing, he put a social media post out, and you just read part of it. And he says, "It is a total incomplete American tragedy that the crooked Joe Biden Department of Injustice is so desperate to jail Steve Bannon and every other Republican, for that matter, for not submitting to the unselect committee of political thug." Of course, for Donald Trump, as well as for Steve Bannon, the success of the MAGA movement largely hinges on convincing a great share of the American public that Donald Trump was not in the wrong on January 6th or in his efforts to overturn the 2020 election. They have consistently made that voter fraud was the reason that Donald Trump lost, including in the first 5 minutes of his remarks, even here in Arizona, the first time he's been back to this state since all the way back in October of 2022, Hallie.
So, Vaughn, you're there in Phoenix with the former president. He's on this West Coast swing, right, doing some fundraising. Talk us through that.
Right after he leaves this event here that is hosted by Turning Point USA, which is the conservative organization run by Charlie Kirk, an ally of Donald Trump, he's going to be leaving here to head to a fundraiser tonight in San Francisco, which could bring in Silicon Valley upwards of more than $10 million. He then has a fundraiser tomorrow in Beverly Hills, California, before making his way to Newport Beach on Saturday for a fundraiser, and then Vegas for a fundraiser. And finally, on Sunday, you'll be holding a campaign rally in Vegas for Donald Trump. We are just less than 5 months out from the general election now. Fundraising is an important part of this here, this home stretch, before ultimately it becomes so crucial. There are a number of battleground states from Arizona, Nevada, Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia. So for Donald Trump, there's a lot of work to be done, and the polls, they remain quite deadlocked here. And so for him, coming to a place like Arizona 5 months out, it would make sense here at a time in a state that he lost by just under 11,000 votes, Hallie.
A lot riding on it. Vaughn Hilliard, nobody can modulate their voice during a campaign rally quite like you, my friend. Thank you for rolling with it there live, as the former president, of course, is at that rally in Phoenix. Thanks, Vaughn. To the other side of the aisle now with President Biden joining more than 20 of the world's biggest leaders to mark 80 years since D-Day, as right now we're seeing the deadliest fighting in Europe since World War II. Some archival footage here with the president now using the moment to urge Western nations to stand up to Russia, saying democracy is not guaranteed, of course, after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. All of these leaders gathering in Normandy, grappling with multiple wars, multiple crises, and key alliances tested once again.
We know the dark forces that these heroes fought against 80 years ago. They never fade. Aggression and greed, the desire to dominate and control, to change borders by force, these are perennial. The struggle between a dictatorship and freedom is unending.
In the crowd there are some 180 World War II veterans. Some of them were just 18 years old when Normandy happened back in 1944. This may be the last commemoration that they are able to make it to. Kelly O'Donnell is traveling with the president and joins us now. And Kelly, we often hear this phrase, right? History doesn't repeat itself, but sometimes it rhymes. And you've seen President Biden trying to draw some of these parallels between World War II and some of the global crises that the international community is facing now.
Very much so. And while there is a weariness among many members of the public about how the U.S. is supporting allies in two separate wars, Ukraine, of course, and then what's been happening with Israel and Gaza, and concerns about how much commitment the U.S. places overseas, the president is trying to remind people here and around the world that there is an enduring requirement of democracies to preserve what they have, and there is always a threat. And there is no more vivid example than what happened at Normandy 80 years ago. And the fact that these veterans would come back at roughly 100 years of age, being able to be present as a living example of what it took then, and a reminder of some of the issues that are at stake now. So the president clearly trying to make those connections and to stand with other allies in Europe in particular, and he has been at the forefront of trying to solidify the support for Ukraine. And tomorrow he'll meet with President Zelensky, who was a part of these commemorations as well. Notably absent, Russia's Vladimir Putin was not invited, even though Russia had been a part of the Allied forces 80 years ago. Times have changed. He is no longer welcome. And the president is trying to draw on these themes to say that democracy matters, that these alliances matter, like NATO and partnerships with other nations, and that the U.S. has an irreplaceable role in the world as a great power. That's something that some in the United States right now in the political discussion are not as focused on. There's a danger of isolationism, the president says. So those themes are very much playing out here. It all sounds like it's about Normandy, and it is, but it is also about contemporary politics and some of the issues that these global leaders are facing. Hallie?
Kelly O'Donnell live for us there in Paris with a very busy week for the president and the press corps with him. Kel, thank you. Back here at home, the suspected Gilgo Beach serial killer now being accused of 2 more murders, meaning the number of his alleged victims is up to at least 6 women. We're talking about Rex Heuermann. Back in court today, you see him there to face those new charges, with prosecutors pointing to what they describe as a planning document that Heuermann used to carry out the killings, they say. He was arrested last July, accused of killing several sex workers and dumping their bodies on a Long Island beach in cases that went unsolved for more than a decade. Antonia Hilton is joining us now. So a planning document, Antonia, what's that about?
Yeah, Hallie, it's a pretty astonishing document that authorities found during this subsequent search of Heuermann's home, and it is pretty stunning. It has 4 different columns, essentially, in which he wrote out things like his problems that he might encounter, supplies that he might need to carry out these murders, likely dump sites, and TRG, what authorities think meant targets, so potential names of the people he was going to go after. This is a gift to the prosecution. Take a listen to some of what they shared today.
That his intent was specifically to locate these victims, to hunt them down, and to bring them under his control and to kill them. His motivations, meticulous planning, and clear intent is obvious.
And this is frankly not all that they found. There was additional DNA evidence tying Rex Heuermann to these murders, phone call logs, travel information, additional witness testimony about his movements and family travel. All of this together painting a fairly damning picture, although the suspect has throughout this entire process maintained his innocence. Hallie.
Can you tell us more about these 2 additional victims that he's accused of killing?
Yeah, absolutely. 2 women who at the time were young women in their 20s. One killed in 1993, the other in 2003, so exactly 10 years apart. Their names are Jessica Taylor and Sandra Costilla. And this has been incredibly painful for their families. In fact, some of the families were here today watching the proceedings and sharing statements through their attorney here. This has been such a long battle for them. You know, as you mentioned just a moment ago, many of these women were previously working as sex workers. They came from low-income families or marginalized communities here in the New New York area, the kind of people who, you know, their families and their friends would say perhaps the authorities didn't at the time rush too hard to figure out what had happened to them, weren't too worried when they went missing. And that's part of what so many people here think has contributed to this investigation, frankly, just taking so long to get to this stage. That 1993 date, it's really striking. We're talking more than 30 years ago now. And so for them to finally hear his name, these charges to come forward, the families are grateful for this, but there's also a bit of an undercurrent of anger here, I'd say, about why it took so long for this case to get to this breakthrough, Hallie.
Antonia Hilton, live for us there in Riverhead. Thank you very much. To a pretty stunning 180 by the FDA tonight, reversing its marketing ban on JUUL vapes. Now, remember, the FDA first ordered the company to stop selling its e-cigarettes a couple years ago, worried about what regulators called insufficient and conflicting data about potentially harmful chemicals coming from the company's cartridges. JUUL appealed, so it means their products stayed on store shelves. You might have seen them. And they're currently the #2 e-cigarette maker in the country. Well, now the FDA says it's going to review JUUL's products again before making any final decision. I want to bring in Dr. John Torres on this now. So wait a second here. Why did the FDA say one thing in 2022 and now they're saying a different thing now?
And Hallie, like you said, this is a stunning reversal, but at the same time, it's a confusing reversal because we're not exactly sure what's happened here, other than we know the fact they are saying, you know, not necessarily that JUUL can sell his products or market his products, but that they're going to look at it to see if they can approve that or will approve that. They are saying that there are other science studies that are out there that they want to make sure they get involved. They did not mention what these science studies are. So the honest fact is we're a bit confused, a bit of a head scratcher. We're not exactly sure why they're doing this, but time will tell where they go with this. Doesn't mean they're going to approve it, but they're certainly looking at that possibility.
So what does it mean for people who like JUUL vapes?
So what it means right now is JUUL is still going to stay on the shelves there, like it has been for the last few years. It might mean that they can start marketing once this decision gets made. And if it is, it's going to move from where it is now. It's lost some of its market share, and it might increase that market share. But we do know other tobacco products are taking that over as well. But the main thing to remember is that this is still what's considered an unhealthy product. The American Cancer Society, the American Lung Association, American Academy of Pediatrics are all saying the same thing. Nothing has changed there. It's unhealthy. It doesn't help you quit smoking. And for kids in particular, it can change their brain chemistry and make them more addicted to this and potentially switch over to cigarettes. And that's the big concern, Hallie.
Dr. John Torres, thank you very much for that breakdown. Appreciate it.
You bet.
Coming up here on the show, FBI agents raiding the house of somebody connected to that attempted $120,000 bribe of a juror we told you about. We're going to give you the update on jury deliberations. Plus, New York City police finding a python in a place it absolutely should not be. We'll tell you where. The federal government making some big moves against the big AI tech companies, sort of dividing up which agencies are going to investigate which ones, according to a source familiar with the matter, talking with CNBC. And what's so interesting here, the Justice Department is going after NVIDIA. You know this company. They're the biggest maker of chips that are used to power AI. It is a humongous company. Just in the last 24 hours, its market cap went over $3 trillion. That is bonkers. The first U.S. company to get there was Apple only a couple years ago. So now NVIDIA is one of the biggest companies in the country, second biggest. And what's interesting here, like Apple makes stuff that you probably use every day. NVIDIA does not, right? It's not a consumer-facing company. It is powering, though, the things that consumers are using now and may use a lot more down the road, like AI. Other companies need these chips to power their tech. It's all coming as the FTC is set to take the lead on looking into Microsoft and OpenAI. OpenAI did not respond to a request for comment. Microsoft and NVIDIA have also declined to comment. All right, Eamon Javers is joining us now. We are so glad to have you because it is super interesting here. You've got this massive company, the darling of the tech world right now, and the specter of a potential federal investigation. Unpack this for us. Why is it so significant?
Yep. Well, look, it's the darling of the tech world right now. It's fueling this AI boom. It's also the darling of Wall Street. I mean, this stock has been on an incredible tear. A lot of people have made a lot of money off of this company, and now we see the U.S. government taking a look at just how this company became so big. Part of what is happening here, Hallie, I think, is an effort to avoid an old-fashioned Washington turf battle between the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, and the Department of Justice, both which have sort of jurisdiction over antitrust matters, which means finding out if companies did something illegal to get monopoly status in their industry that they're in. So in this case, the FTC and DOJ have sort of divided up the different companies and said, you're going to investigate that one, I'm going to investigate this one, and they're going to look into these companies. It's not at all clear they have anything on any of these companies yet. The investigation's still to come, but it's very interesting that they're sort of setting the table for what could be one of the biggest antitrust investigations in the history of antitrust.
And this is the backdrop, or at least the broader context of this, is the U.S. government, the federal government, really taking this more muscular position on some of these antitrust cases, right?
Yep. Yeah, look, this is the Biden administration. They have an approach to this which says that companies having monopoly power is bad, not only for consumers, people who buy stuff, but also for employees, people who work at companies. Because if big companies get super big, they buy up all their competitors, there's only one outlet to go work for in your industry. That prevents you as a worker from being able to go to a rival company and get a higher salary, a better job. So for all those reasons, the Biden administration has been really cracking down here. What's interesting is we're heading into an election in the fall. Not at all clear to me that the Trump administration would take a very much different approach to antitrust here. I think they would continue some of these cases in a Trump administration if that comes to pass, because they are also, for their own reasons, deeply skeptical of big tech as well.
Super interesting. Eamon Javers, great to see you. Thanks, friend. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, GameStop shares. Man, they're up 40% today because, well, you know why. Roaring Kitty, that meme stock leader, has a YouTube live stream set for tomorrow. He hasn't done one of these in a few years. Traders think it'll be a discussion about his huge GameStop stake. We'll see. Number 2, the boil water advisory in Atlanta we've been telling you about has been lifted, fortunately for everybody. It had been in place for nearly a week after 2 huge water main breaks. It took days for things to get back to normal, but testing shows it is okay to drink now. Number 3, the USDA announcing a recall of more than 20,000 pounds of frozen raw beef because it wasn't properly inspected when it came into the U.S. The meat was imported from Uruguay back in March and shipped out to Arizona, California, Oregon, and Washington. No reports of anybody getting sick just yet, but you can find a list of the specific batches on the USDA site. Number 4, eBay, counting is hard, says they're no longer going to accept American Express as a payment option pretty soon. They're blaming unacceptably high fees. They say customers have a whole lot of other payment options available, but Amex is defending itself, saying, hey, their e-pay is similar to other cards. Whole thing goes into effect in August. Number 5, good news for Hunger Games fans. You're getting a new book and a new movie. Suzanne Collins says there's going to be a 5th novel in the series called Sunrise on the Reaping. So it's a prequel to the original trilogy. It'll come out next year. The movie will come out in 2 years. Get psyched. So tonight, an update on that crazy story we've been following out of Minnesota. FBI agents now raiding a home connected to an alleged $120,000 attempt to bribe a juror. Neighbors confirming to our NBC News affiliate in Minneapolis that several FBI agents went through the home you see here, belonging to the man who prosecutors say is the ringleader of a group that allegedly stole millions of dollars from a program meant to give kids meals during COVID. This is after, according to an FBI warrant, a woman showed up to a juror's doorstep with a bag of money. You are seeing it here. That is $120,000 in cash. The night before the jury was supposed to start deliberating, this mysterious woman says to this juror, allegedly, that all that cash and more could be hers if the juror gave a not guilty verdict. Rahima Ellis is joining us now. This was like a wild story when we first heard about it. The cash actually went to a relative of the juror who then conveyed it. I mean, it seems like potentially blatant bribery. So what do we know about where this investigation stands? And what else do we know about the actual deliberations on this case?
A lot of questions, very few answers. But let me tell you this, Hallie. What we know right now is that there is no word yet on what the FBI may have gathered as a result of the raid that they conducted on that home in Minnesota that we believe is connected with the alleged bribe. All 7 defendants in this case right now are in custody until there's a verdict. The source of the alleged bribe also is still a mystery. As you point out, we've got 2 jurors who there was some concern about them. They have been removed, and 2 alternates were put in their place. And the jury is sequestered. We don't have any word yet on any questions of anything of that nature that the jury may have been asking. But this goes on, and everybody is pretty anxious to see if there are going to be some answers. First of all, a verdict. And secondly, if the FBI will reveal what, if anything, they gathered in relation to this case that might be revealing about who is the source of this alleged bribe. Hallie?
Rahima Ellis, super interesting. Keep us posted. Thank you. When we come back, the new study finding a really common sugar substitute may be tied to more of a risk of heart attack and strokes. We'll tell you what food it's in, what gum it's in, and what you should do about it. Plus, check out this hail the size of a pineapple, that could break records. The size of a Monster Energy drink. We'll tell you how people found it later this hour. Some pretty scary moments for a Kansas City Chiefs player, a moment that led the team to cancel its planned activities today. We'll tell you what we know about his health in just a minute. But first, NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day. And because it can be tough to read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. Out of our Southern Bureau, we've been on top of severe weather. Look at this Monster Energy can-sized hail that landed in Texas. 7 inches long, just about. It may be one of the largest pieces of hail the U.S. has ever seen. The storm chasers that found it said they were being battered by baseball-sized hail, which is big already, but then they found the real biggie about 100 yards away. That is monster, to say the least. Also out of our Southern Bureau, a stingray in North Carolina. Remember we told you about her, Charlotte? Her aquarium says she got pregnant, apparently all on her own, with no other stingrays in the tank with her. Well, a lab researching Charlotte now says she has a reproductive disease and is no longer pregnant. Charlotte, the stingray's doing okay, but experts are keeping a close eye on her. Out of our Northeast Bureau, New York City police are trying to figure out how a 5-foot-long python ended up in an apartment building in Manhattan under somebody's sink. Some other people say they saw something slithering up the side of a building. The snake was safely removed, given to the ASPCA. No word yet on where it came from. You are not allowed to own a python in Manhattan, so we'll see. To Kansas now, where a Chiefs defense lineman is reportedly in the hospital. BJ Thompson going into cardiac arrest at an off-season team meeting. Details are just starting to come in on this. I want to get right to Shaq Brewster for the development here. And I think anybody hears cardiac arrest, NFL, people's minds go immediately back to Damar Hamlin in 2022. Yeah. He was also young. He was also in his mid-20s. What happened here? What do we know?
Right, Hallie. And in this case, instead of it being a nationally televised NFL game, this apparently happened at a practice facility during the off-season. Details are still coming in, but it's important to note, and some important context here is that these are off-season practices that are taking place. This is a situation in which live contact is prohibited, pretty strictly prohibited, so they're not wearing pads, they're not colliding into one another. We still don't know exactly what happened, but our affiliate is saying that at about 8:40 this morning, that's when Kansas City Fire Department was dispatched to this training facility. They say, and the NFL says, that medical personnel were on scene after this player had a seizure and then suffered cardiac arrest. The medical personnel worked on him until he was rushed to the hospital. NFL is saying that he is currently in stable condition, and that's certainly good news, but all activities were canceled. Players were sent home. Practice was rescheduled for Friday, and that's when we can expect to hear from the coach of this two-time defending Super Bowl team. But, you know, there's a lot for this coach to talk about. It's not just an update, hopefully a positive update on BJ Thompson, but during the offseason, there are individual players that have been making other kind of headlines. We're talking about one player who was accused of animal cruelty. We're talking about Rashee Rice, who in Houston was facing that situation that he had to turn himself in after a car accident that was the result of some speeding there. I know you covered this extensively on your show, the kicker who had that controversial commencement speech. There's a lot of topics for them to talk about, a lot of topics for the coach to address. But, of course, top of mind for many people is the health and safety of BJ Thompson.
Yeah, no kidding. A lot of eyes on Kansas City. Shaq Brewster, please keep us posted. I know there's more to come on that. Appreciate it. So there's this new study out today. Everybody's talking about it, linking this sugar substitute to a higher risk of heart issues and stroke. It's called Xylitol. And even if the name's not familiar to you, the stuff it's in probably is. Sugar-free gum, some toothpaste, candy. Looks like sugar, tastes like sugar. It has 40% fewer calories, so it's pretty popular. But this new report talking about the dangers of xylitol comes as the use of sugar substitutes has gone up over the past decade, considering concerns about rising obesity rates. Dr. Natalie Azar is joining us now. So xylitol is found in all that stuff we just mentioned. It's also naturally found in fruit, right? It's not in and of itself like a demonized thing. What's up with the concern here? Why is it dangerous maybe as a sugar substitute, but not in other things that you eat?
Yeah, so, and I think that is important for people to understand that it does occur naturally in many, many fruits and vegetables. And at those levels, it is not thought at all to be harmful to people. But what these researchers were interested in looking at was two things, Hallie. One was in people who have a higher level of naturally occurring or xylitol in their blood, which they could actually measure, was there an association with a higher risk for having a heart attack or stroke or cardiovascular death? And they found that there was, that people who had sort of in the highest quarter of xylitol levels in the blood, that there was in fact twice the risk of heart attack, stroke, as well as cardiovascular death than in the people in the lowest quarter. But then they wanted to ask why. They said, what is it about xylitol that could be increasing this risk? They did another study where they looked at xylitol in mice. They looked at xylitol levels in blood and plasma. And then they had healthy people drink xylitol-containing fluids. And what they found was that it actually made the platelets stickier. We all know that platelets can be involved and are very much involved in the formation of clots, which can lead to heart attack and stroke. This is all, by the way, I should say, association, not cause and effect.
Okay, right.
I want to make that very, very clear.
I was just going to say, give us the grain of salt.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I mean, again, all of these studies, these are observational. This you're not taking this home saying that xylitol causes this, but you know, they did note an association for sure.
Can we just have a second of real talk here? Why is it that everything that tastes good is bad for you? Like, what, you know what I mean? Like, I get it. I understand sugar, wine, chocolate. Ugh. Should we really be throwing out all of our packs of sugar-free gum if we chew it once a week? Like, is that real gut check, honestly?
Yeah, no. And I think, again, don't worry about the xylitol, certainly not in the food that you're consuming, and don't worry about in your toothpaste and in the sugarless gum. I think it's for people who are consuming crazy amounts, maybe, and I can't even, give you a definition of what crazy means, but the, regular use that you and I and average people are doing, it's not going to be a concern. But I think it kind of goes back to this idea, Hallie, things that occur naturally, some sugar, some honey, fruits and vegetables to sweeten things, everything in moderation, like our parents used to say, rather than going to these substitutes all the time, kind of if you stick to the real thing, but in moderation, you're probably better off maybe in the long run.
Dr. Natalie Azar, thank you. Thank you for keeping it real. Appreciate you. Coming up here on the show, while the FTC is getting ready to sue the country's biggest liquor distributor, and what it could mean for your cocktail later on. Bert's upset. Bert is wondering what's up. Our focus group on the floor here, very concerned. The FTC, the federal branch in charge of regulating businesses and protecting people, consumers, they're gearing up to go after the biggest liquor distributor in this country. A source familiar tells NBC that the FTC will file this huge antitrust lawsuit against Southern Glazer's Wine and Spirits over alleged claims that the company's given out secret kickbacks to some retailers. What are the kickbacks? Well, we don't know yet. But we do know that this company distributes alcohol for something like 7,000 brands in 44 states. They're huge. $26 billion in revenue last year. So much of it may be at stake in this looming lawsuit. I want to bring in Brian Chung. Oof. A lot of money on the line here, right? So what happens when this lawsuit is actually filed? What would be the immediate impact?
Yeah, and we have to see what the details of this are going to be. But based off what NBC News understands of what the FTC might be working on here, this would be using an obscure 1930s law known as the Robinson-Patman Act. Again, this is from 1936, so from a while ago. And essentially what this does is it bans companies from offering better prices to one buyer over another for the same product. Essentially, price discrimination. If you're offering, for example, a large retailer, which might be the case when it comes to this particular company, giving a large retailer a sweetened deal over, say, a smaller company or a little bodega, well, then this could trigger perhaps the merits of this particular 1936 law that the FTC might have to argue in court. So, again, it's basically if you offer one company a much lower rate when it comes to these types of spirits or wines in this case, well, then maybe that violates. And, again, this is a huge company we're talking about here. Southern Glazer, they distribute alcohol for over 7,000 brands in 44 states, as you mentioned, $26 billion in reported revenue in 2023. This would be a big deal. But again, we have to see what the case looks like once and if the FTC files this.
Would there be an impact on, let's say down the road, I don't know if we're getting too far ahead of our skis here, on what liquor you could buy at some of these places? Like, will there be a consumer effect, basically?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's not any sort of implications in terms of the ability to get tequila or whiskey at your local liquor store. What this essentially looks over is the prices at which your local liquor store is paying a distributor to get that supply. So could it change the supply? Potentially, if it changes the contracts. But again, it's not going to change the availability of whiskey at your local store. Don't panic.
Bro,
Don't
I'm
panic.
just asking for a friend, Bri. That's not for, I'm just checking.
I want to know, too. I want to know, too.
All right, Brian Chung, thank you very much. Good to see you. Still to come here on the show, Elon Musk calling the latest SpaceX launch epic. Why this successful splashdown you're about to see is such a big deal. Big week for space geeks, with the SpaceX Starship today successfully completing its 4th test flight, and the first that did not explode, with the company posting this video of the launch in slow motion. You can see it here. There it is with a big plume coming up around it. It's about to lift off in Texas. And from there, it orbited halfway around the Earth before splashing down in the Indian Ocean. Elon Musk, who of course is the founder and CEO of SpaceX, calling this test flight an epic achievement. That's right on the heels of Boeing's Starliner successfully docking with the International Space Station today after its launch yesterday, delivering Boeing's first NASA crew to the space station. Marissa Parra is joining us with more.
Well, Hallie, it was a major day for both rivals, SpaceX and Boeing, but let's start with SpaceX and Starship. We saw 2 major milestone moments, one bringing everybody in mission control to their feet. They were applauding because this was the first time that the heavy booster made a soft landing splashdown in the ocean. There's another moment, though, that might be deceiving. You see parts of the rocket seemingly coming apart as it's returning back to Earth. You see flames shooting out. You see a flap. You even see the camera lens crack. This, however, it was the first time that the mega rocket, in whatever form it was in, made a return back to Earth. Remember, in previous test missions, we've seen it explode at one point just minutes after liftoff. So this was a major success celebrated by the likes of course, Elon Musk and even NASA Administrator Bill Nelson himself. And remember, this is all part of this overarching mission. NASA has tapped SpaceX Starship to be a part of their mission to return astronauts to the moon, eventually to Mars. Remember, Hallie, this is the largest, most powerful rocket to ever be developed. So big day for SpaceX, but also a big day for Boeing. Separately, we saw Starliner, of course, make that historic launch yesterday out of Cape Canaveral. Those astronauts made it safely to orbit yesterday. And then today, hours ago, they docked successfully at the International Space Station. It was a little bit delayed. This whole mission has been delayed, as we've been talking about. They had some troubleshooting that they had to do with some maneuvering thrusters, but they got through it. And there was a big moment as astronaut Sunny Williams is making her way to the International Space Station. She and Butch were hugging, snapping their fingers, fist pumping, dancing to really celebrate a historic day, because this is the first time that Boeing was able to do this. Remember, it was SpaceX was the main way to bring American astronauts aboard the ISS for the last several years. Now Boeing, for the first time, doing exactly that, Hallie.
Marissa Parr, thank you. It is just incredible, even if you're not a space geek, to see what technology can do, where we can go, and something that just fascinates people and has fascinated people for decades. So pretty amazing. Our thanks to Marissa Parr, of course, Tom Costello, our aviation correspondent as well, who's been involved in some of the coverage, too. It has been a week. It has been a couple of weeks, but that does it for this hour, at least for now. I will see you on Sunday on the Nightly News. Hope you'll join us. And I'll see you right back here Monday on NBC News Now. You're going to be in great hands tomorrow night with Aaron Gilchrist, who will be sitting in the hot seat, if you will. Much more to come right here on NBC News Now. We have more coverage picking up right now. We're coming on the air tonight with the key witness in the case against the president's son taking the stand, his former sister-in-law and former ex-girlfriend, in clearly emotional testimony detailing both of their addictions and what may be a major blow to the defense. We're live at court. Then more rare tornadoes threatening Maryland again tonight after several ripped through multiple states, including one in Michigan, hitting with no warning. The forecast and the danger zone just ahead. And we'll explain the pretty shocking reversal from the FDA for one of the country's most popular vape companies, plus what a new study says about sugar-free gum and whether it's actually okay for your health. Plus, why the Biden administration is getting ready to take on the biggest alcohol distributor in the country later in the show. Hey, I'm Hallie, and tonight, gut-wrenching testimony, highly anticipated testimony from the prosecution's star witness in the historic case against the president's son. Want to show you here Hunter Biden in just the last couple of minutes walking out of court. There he is with his wife. You see him leaving in just the last little bit in Wilmington. That's after Hallie Biden took the stand. She's the widow of Hunter's brother, Beau, and she dated Hunter after Beau died, acknowledging today on the stand she ended up involved with crack herself, but has been clean for years since then, since her involvement with Hunter. Prosecutors think Hallie Biden is the one who can directly connect the dots between Hunter Biden's drug addiction and the gun they say he illegally bought when he checked a box in 2018 saying he was not an addict at the time. The timeline is going to be critical here. The timeline is super important, so let's walk you through it here. I want to show you here on screen. Hunter Biden, this starts, remember, October 2018. This is the critical time because that's when he bought the gun. He went back to Delaware from L.A. on October 6th of that year, according to his lawyer. That's because he and Hallie Biden were going to rehab together at a facility not far from Wilmington. Less than a week later, on October 12th, Hunter Biden bought the gun at the center of the case. That's key. His defense team argues he did not consider himself an addict at the time. Now, the next day, I'm going to show you October 13th. He sends a text to Hallie Biden saying he's waiting for, I'm quoting, a dealer named Mookie in Wilmington. And the day after that, he sends her another text writing he was sleeping in his car smoking crack. Now, Hallie Biden testified today that on October 23rd, she found trash, clothes, remnants of crack, and that gun in Hunter Biden's car, the gun at the center of this case. You're about to see the video of the moment Hallie Biden says she panicked and threw the gun away in a trash can outside a grocery store that same day because she says she didn't want Hunter Biden to hurt himself or for her kids to find it and hurt themselves. That day, Hallie Biden texted Hunter Biden, check yourself into a local rehab, saying this has to stop. Our team inside court telling us that as Hallie spoke, Hunter was watching very carefully. With all of it happening, as President Biden now says in a new interview out tonight that he will not pardon his son if he's convicted and that he'll accept the outcome of the trial however it goes. Mike Memoli is outside court in Wilmington, Delaware. Danny Savalos has our legal breakdown here. Mem, give us a sense of what it was like inside the room, because Hallie Biden also testified about how there were times when Hunter Biden seemed to be in denial about his addiction. She is critical to the prosecution's case here. Was it effective?
Yeah, Hallie is the most critical part of the prosecution's case because she can take us into that October timeline. We've heard mounds of evidence introduced over the previous 2 days, photos, text messages, Hunter Biden's own words in his audiobook to demonstrate the prosecution's argument that Hunter, which the defense is not really disputing, was in the depths of addiction over the course of a long period of time. The question was he addicted when he bought the gun in October of 2018? Well, Hallie brings us to that timeline. And it was interesting that during the time I was in the courtroom, she was clearly uncomfortable. This is an uncomfortable moment for the family. When Abby Lowell, the defense attorney, was cross-examining her, she was really struggling to recall specific moments in time. He asked her if text messages were refreshing her memory. As Abby Lowell said to her at one point, it's difficult to rebuild this timeline, isn't it? And she said yes. But what those text messages indicate is really at the heart of the defense's case, that he was potentially, if his texts were truthful, using drugs within days of purchasing that gun. The thing that the defense attorney is trying to argue, and this is an interesting defense, is he was simply lying to Hallie Biden because, as he was trying to argue, she was asking where he was because she thought perhaps he might have been seeing another woman at the time. That's why.
Danny, let me go to you here because there is a question mark. Is what Hallie Biden testified today to, is it a smoking gun in your view?
It is and it isn't. I mean, the prosecution has clearly proven that Hunter Biden was addicted to crack. They've clearly proven that he was erratic. He led this chaotic lifestyle. And they've done that through a number of witnesses, most of whom he had romantic relationships with. It's been a parade of Hunter Biden's past paramours. So have they succeeded in showing that he used a lot of crack? Yeah, I think they've shown that. But the defense has come up with a clever defense, which is you may have shown that Hunter Biden used crack, but number one, have you shown that he knowingly was an addict when he filled out the Form 4473 and therefore lied? And have you shown that he was an addict during the 10-day or 11-day period that he was actually in possession of this firearm? I think the prosecution has shown enough for a jury to infer that he was, but this defense is pretty clever, and they may be able to argue in closing that they don't have exact evidence of those moments in time.
You know, ma'am, Danny is talking about the ways in which the defense attorney here, Abby Lowell, who is conducting the cross-examination on behalf of Hunter Biden's team, tried to poke holes in this, tried to come up with examples and elucidate examples of how Hallie Biden maybe didn't remember certain things, saying, oh, so you don't recall that at different periods, trying to cast doubt on some of this. And as this was all happening, Hunter Biden, based on our team in court, was paying attention, right? I mean, give us some of the sense of that moment here. We know that the First Lady is in France. She has been at the Wilmington courthouse for the first 3 days of this trial, wasn't there today. She may be back, right? That's an open question. But in the meantime, Hunter Biden is surrounded by friends and family here.
Yeah, every single day we've seen some of the same, but a different rotating cast of people who are close to the family, some people who have been part of President Biden's political life over decades in representing Delaware in the Senate and since then. And today we saw the arrival of Valerie Biden Owens. That is President Biden's sister. She was his former campaign manager. She is a mainstay of family life for the entire Biden clan. And she took a red eye, as I was told by another family member from Los Angeles, just to be there. Now we understand the First Lady coming after less than 24 hours on the ground in France with her husband to be part of the D-Day commemorations, returning to Wilmington with plans to then return to Paris yet again on Saturday for that state dinner. This speaks to the way they want to be supportive of Hunter, but also to be supportive of the whole family. Remember, we're seeing both sets of parents of President Biden's grandchildren being put through this ordeal of having to testify against one another, and I think they want to be there as much as they can for the entire family.
Ma'am, do we get a sense that Hunter Biden may take the stand in his own defense? It would be, I assume, unlikely, but has Abby Lowell said either way?
What we've heard from Abby Lowell in the course of some of the opening statements and in pretrial motions is if Hunter were to testify X. So that speaks to the possibility being raised, but we got new indications as the trial was wrapping up for the day today. The prosecution saying they had just a few more witnesses to bring tomorrow. Then the defense will begin to be able to make its case. Abby Lowell saying he had maybe 2 to 3 witnesses, including potentially an expert. We also understand Naomi Biden, Hunter Biden's eldest daughter, may be one of those who testify, but no indication at this point that Hunter Biden himself would testify on his own defense.
So, Danny, that brings us to the timing here, because the prosecution whipped through a number of witnesses today. We know that the defense, based on what you've told us in the past, in many cases often will go shorter than the prosecution, since the burden of proof is, of course, on the prosecutors. What's your sense of timing on this? This was expected to be a fairly short-ish trial, a week plus. What do you think?
Oh, definitely. We're in federal court. Federal court always moves faster. This is a case where I think you might see some defense witnesses, but I don't see why they need to call Hunter Biden. I think maybe they call some precipient witnesses, people who may have seen Hunter during this time and said, oh, he was clean, which might help them show the jury that they can draw the inference that, hey, some days he had problems, but at the time he had the firearm, or at the time he filled out the form, that he was not, or not aware that he was an addict. So I think they might call a couple witnesses. I don't think they're going to have a very long defense. And I don't think this is going to be a very long deliberation, because the issues are not particularly complex. You could see the jury doing this on the first round vote and probably arriving unanimity one way or the other.
Danny Savalos, Mike Memoli, much more to talk about in the days to come. Appreciate it from both of you. Thanks. Right now, some rare tornado warnings in Maryland yet again. You don't see it every day in that state, but here we are seeing it basically 2 days in a row, as a number of states are dealing with the aftermath of an incredibly severe storm system that whipped through multiple locations in Michigan, leaving a 2-year-old boy dead and his mother badly hurt. The fire chief in that Detroit suburb said this tree came crashing through the house because of 2 tornadoes that touched down there. The tree landed on a bed where they were sleeping. You can see the view obviously overhead here. It is horrific. We're told the tornado happened so suddenly there was just not a warning sign, enough of a warning sign, enough lead time basically to set those sirens off. We're seeing devastating stories like this one across multiple states. In Ohio, for example, thousands are in the dark after a tornado there. And then in Maryland, where emergency workers responded to reports of collapsed buildings, people trapped after a tornado hit. Out west, it is not the tornadoes, it is the heat baking them. Triple-digit temperatures, record highs in California, with at least 11 people getting heat exhaustion at a rally for former President Trump in Phoenix. We've got our team all over this for you. George Solis in Maryland, meteorologist Bill Cairns sending by. George, let me start with you. Talk to us about what folks there have seen and what they're bracing for next.
Yeah, Hallie, keep in mind, people here say this is not the Midwest, right? This is Gaithersburg, Maryland. They're used to seeing the occasional storm, nothing like what they saw last night. You can see Cleanup here very much well underway. I can show you here. This is one of the homes that we saw in some of that video where one of those tree limbs completely crashed onto the roof. It has been chopped up here. What you hear now is the symphony of chainsaws and leaf blowers as the cleanup in this community continues, bringing some of those treetops right here down to the ground. Take a look at this car. This was completely destroyed by one of those trees, and bringing a little nature from those treetops a little closer to us here on the ground. We see some bugs and other creepy crawlies here that aren't welcome by the visitors. Fortunately, though, here, Hallie, amazingly, through all of this damage, no one was killed. We mentioned those family members that were trapped, all of them expected to survive. I actually spoke with one of the Good Samaritans who raced over as soon as they saw that tree collapse onto one of those homes, called 911, and went over to help. Here's what the young man told me.
I was definitely caught off guard at first because usually you will never think it will be your house or any house in Gaithersburg for it to be a tornado. It was a wild experience, you know, just being in the moment, seeing the trees fall and just being able to react and go and call for help for our neighbors.
Yeah, Hallie, National Weather Service still surveying some of the damage out here. They believe around 2 of those twisters hit this area. Again, very unusual. Many here hoping they don't see a tornado like this for a very long time. Hallie?
No kidding. George Solis, thank you very much. Bill Cairns, let me bring you in. So is that it? Does the threat seem to be over? What's up with this warning here tonight?
Yeah, so we got isolated severe storms in the east again. Of course, yesterday we thought it was going to be isolated. It turned into a tornado outbreak. I mean, in whole, 22 tornadoes. You know, the horrible story we told you there with the fatality of the child outside the suburbs of Detroit. We also had 2 in Columbus. And then the Washington, D.C. area northwards. That's where, I mean, we had 2 supercell thunderstorms, like what we talk about in the plains or in the deep south, that produced all of these tornadoes, over a dozen yesterday. So for tonight and the rest of today, isolated severe storms. Worry about more wind damage than anything else. This area of yellow is the slight risk, and that's pretty much where we have our severe thunderstorm watch up until 9 o'clock. Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, you look fine. Just a hit-and-miss showers. New York City, a couple more showers late tonight. It looks like from Richmond southwards, that's where we're tracking some of the strongest storms, and we only have 1 severe thunderstorm warning. Gusts up to about 60 miles per hour are possible, and that's going to be heading over Interstate 85 here on the 295 just south of Richmond. In Richmond itself right now, heavy rain right during the rush hour. As far as the heat goes, the peak is today and tomorrow. Over the weekend, it slowly cools back down. It's been gradually building all week long. And let's see who the hottest is right now. In Phoenix, you just hit 110. Vegas is at 109. So this is like middle of the summer type heat wave. This is early for this. And we do think it's still going to get warmer. I mean, it's only 2 o'clock in the afternoon in these areas. Phoenix up to 113 today. Vegas 111. Of course, we do it again tomorrow, but it also gets kind of widespread. Even areas of Colorado are going up near 100 degrees. Albuquerque too. So, and then from there, as we go through the weekend, it goes back to where it should be for this time of year. Phoenix, you drop back down to the low 100s where it should be. Same for Palm Springs. But, yeah, people just don't want this to be what's going to happen the rest of the summer. And Hallie, I'm looking at the long range, trying to see what's happening.
Yeah, talk us through those trends we've been seeing.
Yeah, the trends look like it's going to switch. The west is actually going to cool off, and I hope everyone on the East Coast is ready for about a week from right now. I got a funny feeling I'm going to be talking about some pretty extreme heat as we head towards Father's Day weekend.
Well, yuck. And if you talk about heat, we've also got to look not just forward but backwards, Bill, because we're now learning that we have kept setting records for record heat.
Yeah.
Like month after month. It's worse and worse than the month before.
Okay, so we were in El Nino, plus we have man-made global warming that combined with it for this incredibly warm year last year. Now we're dropping El Nino and going towards a neutral, or what we call La Nina. So that's cooling of water in the Pacific. So we're waiting for our global temperatures to drop, and we're waiting for the oceans to drop and get cooler, because they should, because the El Nino's gone. And so far, it's not happening. A lot of scientists are like, okay, let's, what's going on here? We'll talk more about this in the months ahead.
Bill Cairns, appreciate you. Thank you. Yeah. Steve Bannon, now the former advisor to former President Trump, in just the last few hours walking out of court after being sentenced to report to prison in just a couple of weeks, or at least being told to go to prison, and saying that is not going to silence him. Listen to this.
I've got great lawyers, and we're going to go all the way to the Supreme Court if we have to. There's nothing that can shut me up, and nothing that will shut me up. There's not a prison built or a jail built that will ever shut me up.
A feisty Steve Bannon there, a controversial figure, of course, host of that War Room show that is popular among the former president's allies and supporters. He's going to have to report to prison on July 1st. Interestingly, just 10 days before former President Trump himself will learn his own sentence. Remember, Bannon was found guilty on 2 counts of contempt of Congress for defying subpoenas from the January 6th committee. And if you're like, wait a second, Hallie, wasn't Bannon already sentenced to prison? Yeah, that happened like a year and a half ago. He appealed. That is what has brought us to today. NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard is joining us now from the rally where former President Trump himself is going to be at. And here we have yet again, Vaughn, a collision between the next election in 2024, obviously this year in November, and the last election, the fallout from that attack on the Capitol. And in this instance, a big supporter of the former president's refusing to cooperate with the congressional investigation.
Right. You said it, Hallie. Steve Bannon, since folks will recall, back in 2017, he was actually a chief strategist in the White House for about the first year before he left and took sort of an outside informal advisory role. But in the years since the January 6th attack, he has really become the preeminent voice of the MAGA movement, if you will, in the right-wing media ecosystem. His podcast not is only on radio, but it is also on streaming television. And he really has become the voice of the MAGA movement in a lot of ways beyond Donald Trump. And Donald Trump himself is not naive to that. And that's why just in the last few moments, Donald Trump, you're seeing him on stage here. We'll see if he actually makes any remarks about Bannon having to report to jail on July 1st. But on his way here to the event venue in Phoenix upon landing, he put a social media post out, and I'll just read part of it. And said, he says, "It is a total incomplete American tragedy that the crooked Joe Biden Department of Injustice is so desperate to jail Steve Bannon and every other Republican, for that matter, for not submitting to the unselect committee of political thug." Of course, for Donald Trump, as well as for Steve Bannon, the success of the MAGA movement largely hinges on convincing a great share of the American public that Donald Trump was not in the wrong on January 6th or in his efforts to overturn the 2020 election. They have consistently made that voter fraud was the reason that Donald Trump lost, including in the first 5 minutes of his remarks, even here in Arizona, the first time he's been back to this state since all the way back in October of 2022, Hallie.
So, Vaughn, you're there in Phoenix with the former president. He's on this West Coast swing, right, doing some fundraising. Talk us through that.
Right after he leaves this event here that is hosted by Turning Point USA, which is the conservative organization run by Charlie Kirk, an ally of Donald Trump, he's going to be leaving here to head to a fundraiser tonight in San Francisco, which could bring in Silicon Valley upwards of more than $10 million. He then has a fundraiser tomorrow in Beverly Hills, California, before making his way to Newport Beach on Saturday for a fundraiser, and then Vegas for a fundraiser. And finally, on Sunday, you'll be holding a campaign rally in Vegas for Donald Trump. We are just less than 5 months out from the general election now. Fundraising is an important part of this year, this home stretch, before ultimately it becomes so crucial. There are a number of battleground states from Arizona, Nevada, Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia. So for Donald Trump, there's a lot of work to be done, and the polls, they remain quite deadlocked here. And so for him, coming to a place like Arizona 5 months out, it would make sense here at a time in a state that he lost by just under 11,000 votes, Hallie.
A lot riding on it. Vaughn Hilliard, nobody can modulate their voice during a campaign rally quite like you, my friend. Thank you for rolling with it there live, as the former president, of course, is at that rally in Phoenix. Thanks, Vaughn. To the other side of the aisle now with President Biden joining more than 20 of the world's biggest leaders to mark 80 years since D-Day, as right now we're seeing the deadliest fighting in Europe since World War II. Some archival footage here with the president now using the moment to urge Western nations to stand up to Russia, saying democracy is not guaranteed, of course, after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. All of these leaders gathering in Normandy, grappling with multiple wars, multiple crises, and key alliances tested once again.
We know the dark forces that these heroes fought against 80 years ago. They never fade. Aggression and greed, the desire to dominate and control, to change borders by force, these are perennial. The struggle between a dictatorship and freedom is unending.
In the crowd there are some 180 World War II veterans. Some of them were just 18 years old when Normandy happened back in 1944. This may be the last commemoration that they are able to make it to. Kelly O'Donnell is traveling with the president and joins us now. And Kelly, we often hear this phrase, right? History doesn't repeat itself, but sometimes it rhymes. And you've seen President Biden trying to draw some of these parallels between World War II and some of the global crises that the international community is facing now.
Very much so. And while there is a weariness among many members of the public about how the U.S. is supporting allies in two separate wars, Ukraine, of course, and then what's been happening with Israel and Gaza, and concerns about how much commitment the U.S. places overseas, the president is trying to remind people here and around the world that there is an enduring requirement of democracies to preserve what they have, and there is always a threat. And there is no more vivid example than what happened at Normandy 80 years ago. And the fact that these veterans would come back at roughly 100 years of age, being able to be present as a living example of what it took then, and a reminder of some of the issues that are at stake now. So the president clearly trying to make those connections and to stand with other allies in Europe in particular, and he has been at the forefront of trying to solidify the support for Ukraine. And tomorrow he'll meet with President Zelensky, who was a part of these commemorations as well. Notably absent, Russia's Vladimir Putin was not invited, even though Russia had been a part of the Allied forces 80 years ago. Times have changed. He is no longer welcome. And the president is trying to draw on these themes to say that democracy matters, that these alliances matter, like NATO and partnerships with other nations, and that the U.S. has an irreplaceable role in the world as a great power. That's something that some in the United States right now in the political discussion are not as focused on. There's a danger of isolationism, the president says. So those themes are very much playing out here. It all sounds like it's about Normandy, and it is, but it is also about contemporary politics and some of the issues that these global leaders are facing. Hallie?
Kelly O'Donnell live for us there in Paris with a very busy week for the president and the press corps with him. Kel, thank you. Back here at home, the suspected Gilgo Beach serial killer now being accused of 2 more murders, meaning the number of his alleged victims is up to at least 6 women. We're talking about Rex Heuermann. Back in court today, you see him there to face those new charges, with prosecutors pointing to what they describe as a planning document that Heuermann used to carry out the killings, they say. He was arrested last July, accused of killing several sex workers and dumping their bodies on a Long Island beach in cases that went unsolved for more than a decade. Antonia Hilton is joining us now. So a planning document, Antonia, what's that about?
Yeah, Hallie, it's a pretty astonishing document that authorities found during this subsequent search of Heuermann's home, and it is pretty stunning. It has 4 different columns, essentially, in which he wrote out things like his problems that he might encounter, supplies that he might need to carry out these murders, likely dump sites, and TRG, what authorities think meant targets, so potential names of the people he was going to go after. This is a gift to the prosecution. Take a listen to some of what they shared today.
That his intent was specifically to locate these victims, to hunt them down, and to bring them under his control and to kill them. His motivations, meticulous planning, and clear intent is obvious.
And this is, frankly, not all that they found. There was additional DNA evidence tying Rex Heuermann to these murders, phone call logs, travel information, additional witness testimony about his movements and family travel. All of this together painting a fairly damning picture, although the suspect has, throughout this entire process, maintained his innocence. Hallie.
Can you tell us more about these 2 additional victims that he's accused of killing?
Yeah, absolutely. 2 women who at the time were young women in their 20s. One killed in 1993, the other in 2003, so exactly 10 years apart. Their names are Jessica Taylor and Sandra Costilla. And this has been incredibly painful for their families. In fact, some of the families were here today watching the proceedings and sharing statements through their attorney here. This has been such a long battle for them. You know, as you mentioned just a moment ago, many of these women were previously working as sex workers. They came from low-income families or marginalized communities here in the New York area, the kind of people who, you know, their families and their friends would say perhaps the authorities didn't at the time rush too hard to figure out what had happened to them, weren't too worried when they went missing. And that's part of what so many people here think has contributed to this investigation, frankly, just taking so long to get to this stage. That 1993 date, it's really striking. We're talking more than 30 years ago now. And so for them to finally hear his name, these charges to come forward, the families are grateful for this, but there's also a bit of an undercurrent of anger here, I'd say, about why it took so long for this case to get to this breakthrough, Hallie.
Antonia Hilton, live for us there in Riverhead. Thank you very much. To a pretty stunning 180 by the FDA tonight, reversing its marketing ban on JUUL vapes. Now, remember, the FDA first ordered the company to stop selling its e-cigarettes a couple years ago, worried about what regulators called insufficient and conflicting data about potentially harmful chemicals coming from the company's cartridges. JUUL appealed, so it means their products stayed on store shelves. You might have seen them. And they're currently the #2 e-cigarette maker in the country. Well, now the FDA says it's going to review JUUL's products again before making any final decision. I want to bring in Dr. John Torres on this now. So wait a second here. Why did the FDA say one thing in 2022 and now they're saying a different thing now?
And Hallie, like you said, this is a stunning reversal, but at the same time, it's a confusing reversal because we're not exactly sure what's happened here, other than we know the fact they are saying, not necessarily that JUUL can sell its products or market its products, but that they're going to look at it to see if they can approve that or will approve that. They are saying that there are other science studies that are out there that they want to make sure they get involved. They did not mention what these science studies are. So the honest fact is we're a bit confused, a bit of a head scratcher. We're not exactly sure why they're doing this, but time will tell where they go with this. Doesn't mean they're going to approve it, but they're certainly looking at that possibility.
So what does it mean for people who like JUUL vapes?
So what it means right now is JUUL is still going to stay on the shelves there, like it has been for the last few years. It might mean that they can start marketing once this decision gets made, and if it is, it's going to move from where it is now. It's lost some of its market share, and it might increase that market share, but we do know other tobacco products are taking that over as well. But the main thing to remember is that this is still what's considered an unhealthy product. The American Cancer Society, the American Lung Association, American Academy of Pediatrics are all saying the same thing. Nothing has changed there. It's unhealthy. It doesn't help you quit smoking, and for kids in particular, it can change their brain chemistry and make them more addicted to this and potentially switch over to cigarettes, and that's the big concern, Hallie.
Dr. John Torres, thank you very much for that breakdown. Appreciate it.
You bet.
Coming up here on the show, FBI agents raiding the house of somebody connected to that attempted $120,000 bribe of a juror we told you about. We're going to give you the update on jury deliberations. Plus, New York City police finding a python in a place it absolutely should not be. We'll tell you where. The federal government making some big moves against the big AI tech companies, sort of dividing up which agencies are going to investigate which ones, according to a source familiar with the matter, talking with CNBC. And what's so interesting here, the Justice Department is going after NVIDIA. You know this company. They're the biggest maker of chips that are used to power AI. It is a humongous company. Just in the last 24 hours, its market cap went over $3 trillion. That is bonkers. The first U.S. company to get there was Apple only a couple years ago. So now NVIDIA is one of the biggest companies in the country, second biggest. And what's interesting here, like Apple makes stuff that you probably use every day. NVIDIA does not, right? It's not a consumer-facing company. It is powering, though, the things that consumers are using now and may use a lot more down the road, like AI. Other companies need these chips to power their tech. It's all coming as the FTC is set to take the lead on looking into Microsoft and OpenAI. OpenAI did not respond to a request for comment. Microsoft and NVIDIA have also declined to comment. All right, Eamon Javers is joining us now. We are so glad to have you because it is super interesting here. You've got this massive company, the darling of the tech world right now, and the specter of a potential federal investigation. Unpack this for us. Why is it so significant?
Yep. Well, look, it's the darling of the tech world right now. It's fueling this AI boom. It's also the darling of Wall Street. I mean, this stock has been on an incredible tear. A lot of people have made a lot of money off of this company, and now we see the U.S. government taking a look at just how this company became so big. Part of what is happening here, Hallie, I think, is an effort to avoid an old-fashioned Washington turf battle between the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, and the Department of Justice, both which have sort of jurisdiction over antitrust matters, which means finding out if companies did something illegal to get monopoly status in their industry that they're in. So in this case, the FTC and DOJ have sort of divided up the different companies and said, you're going to investigate that one, I'm going to investigate this one, and they're going to look into these companies. It's not at all clear they have anything on any of these companies yet. The investigation's still to come, but it's very interesting that they're sort of setting the table for what could be one of the biggest antitrust investigations in the history of antitrust.
And this is the backdrop, or at least the broader context of this, is the U.S. government, the federal government, really taking this more muscular position on some of these antitrust cases, right?
Yep. Yeah, look, this is the Biden administration. They have an approach to this which says that companies having monopoly power is bad, not only for consumers, people who buy stuff, but also for employees, people who work at companies. Because if big companies get super big, they buy up all their competitors, there's only one outlet to go work for in your industry. That prevents you as a worker from being able to go to a rival company and get a higher salary, a better job. So for all those reasons, the Biden administration has been really cracking down here. What's interesting is we're heading into an election in the fall. Not at all clear to me that the Trump administration would take a very much different approach to antitrust here. I think they would continue some of these cases in a Trump administration if that comes to pass, because they are also, for their own reasons, deeply skeptical of big tech as well.
Super interesting. Eamon Javers, great to see you. Thanks, friend. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, GameStop shares. Man, they're up 40% today because, well, you know why. Roaring Kitty, that meme stock leader, has a YouTube live stream set for tomorrow. He hasn't done one of these in a few years. Traders think it'll be a discussion about his huge GameStop stake. We'll see. Number 2, the boil water advisory in Atlanta we've been telling you about has been lifted, fortunately for everybody. It had been in place for nearly a week after 2 huge water main breaks. It took days for things to get back to normal, but testing shows it is okay to drink now. Number 3, the USDA announcing a recall of more than 20,000 pounds of frozen raw beef because it wasn't properly inspected when it came into the U.S. The meat was imported from Uruguay back in March and shipped out to Arizona, California, Oregon, and Washington. No reports of anybody getting sick just yet, but you can find a list of the specific batches on the USDA site. Number 4, eBay, counting is hard, says they're no longer going to accept American Express as a payment option pretty soon. They're blaming unacceptably high fees. They say customers have a whole lot of other payment options available, but Amex is defending itself, saying, hey, their ePay is similar to other cards. Whole thing goes into effect in August. Number 5, good news for Hunger Games fans. You're getting a new book and a new movie. Suzanne Collins says there's going to be a 5th novel in the series called Sunrise on the Reaping. So it's a prequel to the original trilogy. It'll come out next year. The movie will come out in 2 years. Get psyched. So tonight, an update on that crazy story we've been following out of Minnesota. FBI agents now raiding a home connected to an alleged $120,000 attempt to bribe a juror. Neighbors confirming to our NBC News affiliate in Minneapolis that several FBI agents went through the home you see here, belonging to the man who prosecutors say is the ringleader of a group that allegedly stole millions of dollars from a program meant to give kids meals during COVID. This is after, according to an FBI warrant, a woman showed up to a juror's doorstep with a bag of money. You are seeing it here. That is $120,000 in cash. The night before the jury was supposed to start deliberating, this mysterious woman says to this juror, allegedly, that all that cash and more could be hers if the juror gave a not guilty verdict. Rahima Ellis is joining us now. This was like a wild story when we first heard about it. The cash actually went to a relative of the juror who then conveyed it. I mean, it seems like potentially blatant bribery. So what do we know about where this investigation stands? And what else do we know about the actual deliberations on this case?
A lot of questions, very few answers. But let me tell you this, Hallie. What we know right now is that there is no word yet on what the FBI may have gathered as a result of the raid that they conducted on that home in Minnesota that we believe is connected with the alleged bribe. All 7 defendants in this case right now are in custody until there's a verdict. The source of the alleged bribe also is still a mystery. As you point out, we've got 2 jurors who there was some concern about them. They have been removed, and 2 alternates were put in their place. And the jury is sequestered. We don't have any word yet on any questions of anything of that nature that the jury may have been asking. But this goes on, and everybody is pretty anxious to see if there are going to be some answers. First of all, a verdict. And secondly, if the FBI will reveal what, if anything, they gathered in relation to this case that might be revealing about who is the source of this alleged bribe. Hallie?
Rahima Ellis, super interesting. Keep us posted. Thank you. When we come back, the new study finding a really common sugar substitute may be tied to more of a risk of heart attack and strokes. We'll tell you what food it's in, what gum it's in, and what you should do about it. Plus, check out this hail the size of a pineapple, that could break records. The size of a Monster Energy drink. We'll tell you how people found it later this hour. Some pretty scary moments for a Kansas City Chiefs player, a moment that led the team to cancel its planned activities today. We'll tell you what we know about his health in just a minute. But first, NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day. And because it can be tough to read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. Out of our Southern Bureau, we've been on top of severe weather. Look at this Monster Energy can-sized hail that landed in Texas. 7 inches long, just about. It may be one of the largest pieces of hail the U.S. has ever seen. The storm chasers that found it, so they were being battered by baseball-sized hail, which is big already, but then they found the real biggie about 100 yards away. That is monster, to say the least. Also out of our Southern Bureau, a stingray in North Carolina. Remember we told you about her, Charlotte? Her aquarium says she got pregnant, apparently all on her own, with no other stingrays in the tank with her. Well, a lab researching Charlotte now says she has a reproductive disease and is no longer pregnant. Charlotte, the stingray's doing okay, but experts are keeping a close eye on her. Out of our Northeast Bureau, New York City police are trying to figure out how a 5-foot-long python ended up in an apartment building in Manhattan under somebody's sink. Some other people say they saw something slithering up the side of a building. The snake was safely removed, given to the ASPCA. No word yet on where it came from. You are not allowed to own a python in Manhattan, so we'll see. To Kansas now, where a Chiefs defense lineman is reportedly in the hospital. BJ Thompson going into cardiac arrest at an off-season team meeting. Details are just starting to come in on this. I want to get right to Shaq Brewster for the development here. And I think anybody hears cardiac arrest, NFL, people's minds go immediately back to Damar Hamlin in 2022. Yeah. He was also young. He was also in his mid-20s. What happened here? What do we know?
Right, Hallie. And in this case, instead of it being a nationally televised NFL game, this apparently happened at a practice facility during the off-season. Details are still coming in, but it's important to note, and some important context here is that these are off-season practices that are taking place. This is a situation in which live contact is prohibited, pretty strictly prohibited, so they're not wearing pads, they're not colliding into one another. We still don't know exactly what happened, but our affiliate is saying that at about 8:40 this morning, that's when Kansas City Fire Department was dispatched to this training facility. They say, and the NFL says, that medical personnel were on scene after this player had a seizure and then suffered cardiac arrest. The medical personnel worked on him until he was rushed to the hospital. NFL is saying that he is currently in stable condition, and that's certainly good news, but all activities were canceled. Players were sent home. Practice was rescheduled for Friday, and that's when we can expect to hear from the coach of this two-time defending Super Bowl team. But, you know, there's a lot for this coach to talk about. It's not just an update, hopefully a positive update on BJ Thompson, but during the offseason, there are individual players that have been making other kind of headlines. We're talking about one player who was accused of animal cruelty. We're talking about Rashee Rice, who in Houston was facing that situation that he had to turn himself in after a car accident that was the result of some speeding there. I know you covered this extensively on your show, the kicker who had that controversial commencement speech. There's a lot of topics for them to talk about, a lot of topics for the coach to address. But, of course, top of mind for many people is the health and safety of BJ Thompson.
Yeah, no kidding. A lot of eyes on Kansas City. Shaq Brewster, please keep us posted. I know there's more to come on that. Appreciate it. So there's this new study out today. Everybody's talking about it, linking this sugar substitute to a higher risk of heart issues and stroke. It's called Xylitol. And even if the name's not familiar to you, the stuff it's in probably is. Sugar-free gum, some toothpaste, candy. Looks like sugar, tastes like sugar. It has 40% fewer calories, so it's pretty popular. But this new report talking about the dangers of xylitol comes as the use of sugar substitutes has gone up over the past decade, considering concerns about rising obesity rates. Dr. Natalie Azar is joining us now. So xylitol is found in all that stuff we just mentioned. It's also naturally found in fruit, right? It's not in and of itself like a demonized thing. What's up with the concern here? Why is it dangerous maybe as a sugar substitute, but not in other things that you eat?
Yeah, so, and I think that is important for people to understand that it does occur naturally in many, many fruits and vegetables. And at those levels, it is not thought at all to be harmful to people. But what these researchers were interested in looking at was two things, Hallie. One was in people who have a higher level of naturally occurring or xylitol in their blood, which they could actually measure, was there an association with a higher risk for having a heart attack or stroke or cardiovascular death? And they found that there was, that people who had sort of in the highest quarter of xylitol levels in the blood, that there was, in fact, twice the risk of heart attack, stroke, as well as cardiovascular death than in the people in the lowest quarter. But then they wanted to ask why. They said, what is it about xylitol that could be increasing this risk? They did another study where they looked at xylitol in mice. They looked at xylitol levels in blood and plasma. And then they had healthy people drink xylitol-containing fluids. And what they found was that it actually made the platelets stickier. We all know that platelets can be involved and are very much involved in the formation of clots, which can lead to heart attack and stroke. This is all, by the way, I should say, association, not cause and effect.
Okay, right.
I want to make that very, very clear.
I was just going to say, give us the grain of salt.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I mean, again, all of these studies, these are observational. This, you're not taking this home saying that xylitol causes this, but, you know, they did note an association, for sure.
Can we just, like, have a second of real talk here? Why is it that everything that tastes good is bad for you? Like, what, you know what I mean? Like, I get it. I understand. Sugar, wine, chocolate. Ugh. Should we really be throwing out all of our packs of sugar-free gum if we chew it once a week? Like, is that gut check, honestly?
Yeah, no. And I think, like, again, don't worry about the xylitol, certainly not in the food that you're consuming, and don't worry about in your toothpaste and in the sugarless gum. I think it's for people who are consuming crazy amounts, maybe, and I can't even, give you a definition of what crazy means, but the, regular use that you and I and average people are doing, it's not going to be a concern. But I think it kind of goes back to this idea, Hallie, like, things that occur naturally, some sugar, some honey, fruits and vegetables to sweeten things, everything in moderation, like our parents used to say, rather than going to these substitutes all the time. Kind of, if you stick to the real thing, but in moderation, you're probably better off maybe in the long run.
Dr. Natalie Azar, thank you. Thank you for keeping it real. Appreciate you. Coming up here on the show, while the FTC is getting ready to sue the country's biggest liquor distributor, and what it could mean for your cocktail later on. Bert's upset. Bert is wondering what's up. Our focus group on the floor here, very concerned. The FTC, the federal branch in charge of regulating businesses and protecting people, consumers, they're gearing up to go after the biggest liquor distributor in this country. A source familiar tells NBC that the FTC will file this huge antitrust lawsuit against Southern Glazer's Wine and Spirits over alleged claims that the company's given out secret kickbacks to some retailers. What are the kickbacks? Well, we don't know yet. But we do know that this company distributes alcohol for something like 7,000 brands in 44 states. They're huge. $26 billion in revenue last year. So much of it may be at stake in this looming lawsuit. I want to bring in Brian Chung. Woof. A lot of money on the line here, right? So what happens when this lawsuit is actually filed? What would be the immediate impact?
Yeah, and we have to see what the details of this are going to be. But based off what NBC News understands of what the FTC might be working on here, this would be using an obscure 1930s law known as the Robinson-Patman Act. Again, this is from 1936, so from a while ago. And essentially what this does is it bans companies from offering better prices to one buyer over another for the same product. Essentially, price discrimination. If you're offering, for example, a large retailer, which might be the case when it comes to this particular company, giving a large retailer a sweetened deal over, say, a smaller company or a little bodega, well, then this could trigger perhaps the merits of this particular 1936 law that the FTC might have to argue in court. So, again, it's basically if you offer one company a much lower rate when it comes to these types of spirits or wines in this case, well, then maybe that violates. And, again, this is a huge company we're talking about here. Southern Glazer, they distribute alcohol for over 7,000 brands in 44 states, as you mentioned, $26 billion in reported revenue in 2023. This will be a big deal. But again, we have to see what the case looks like once and if the FTC files this.
Would there be an impact on, like, let's say down the road, I don't know if we're getting too far ahead of our skis here, on what liquor you could buy at some of these places? Like, will there be a consumer effect, basically?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's not any sort of implications in terms of the ability to get tequila or whiskey at your local liquor store. What this essentially looks over is the prices at which your local liquor store is paying a distributor to get that supply. So could it change the supply? Potentially, if it changes the contracts. But again, it's not going to change the availability of whiskey at your local store. Don't panic.
Bro,
I'm
just asking for a friend, Bri. That's not for, I'm just checking.
I want to know, too. I want to know, too.
All right, Brian Chung, thank you very much. Good to see you. Still to come here on the show, Elon Musk calling the latest SpaceX launch epic. Why this successful splashdown you're about to see is such a big deal. Big week for space geeks, with the SpaceX Starship today successfully completing its 4th test flight, and the first that did not explode. With the company posting this video of the launch in slow motion. You can see it here. There it is with the big plume coming up around it. It's about to lift off in Texas. And from there, it orbited halfway around the Earth before splashing down in the Indian Ocean. Elon Musk, who of course is the founder and CEO of SpaceX, calling this test flight an epic achievement. That's right on the heels of Boeing's Starliner successfully docking with the International Space Station today after its launch yesterday, delivering Boeing's first NASA crew to the space station. Marissa Parra is joining us with more.
Well, Hallie, it was a major day for both rivals, SpaceX and Boeing, but let's start with SpaceX and Starship. We saw 2 major milestone moments, one bringing everybody in mission control to their feet. They were applauding because this was the first time that the heavy booster made a soft landing splashdown in the ocean. There's another moment, though, that might be deceiving. You see parts of the rocket seemingly coming apart as it's returning back to Earth. You see flames shooting out. You see a flap. You even see the camera lens crack. This, however, it was the first time that the mega rocket, in whatever form it was in, made a return back to Earth. Remember, in previous test missions, we've seen it explode at one point just minutes after liftoff. So this was a major success celebrated by the likes of course, Elon Musk and even NASA Administrator Bill Nelson himself. And remember, this is all part of this overarching mission. NASA has tapped SpaceX Starship to be a part of their mission to return astronauts to the moon, eventually to Mars. Remember, Hallie, this is the largest, most powerful rocket to ever be developed. So big day for SpaceX, but also a big day for Boeing. Separately, we saw Starliner, of course, make that historic launch yesterday out of Cape Canaveral. Those astronauts made it safely to orbit yesterday. And then today, hours ago, they docked successfully at the International Space Station. It was a little bit delayed. This whole mission has been delayed, as we've been talking about. They had some troubleshooting that they had to do with some maneuvering thrusters, but they got through it. And there was a big moment as astronaut Sunny Williams is making her way to the International Space Station. She and Butch were hugging, snapping their fingers, fist pumping, dancing to really celebrate a historic day, because this is the first time that Boeing was able to do this. Remember, it was SpaceX was the main way to bring American astronauts aboard the ISS for the last several years. Now Boeing, for the first time, doing exactly that, Hallie.
Marissa Parr, thank you. It is just incredible, even if you're not a space geek, to see what technology can do, where we can go, and something that just fascinates people and has fascinated people for decades. So pretty amazing. Our thanks to Marissa Parr, of course, Tom Costello, our aviation correspondent as well, who's been involved in some of the coverage, too. It has been a week. It has been a couple of weeks, but that does it for this hour, at least for now. I will see you on Sunday on the Nightly News. Hope you'll join us. And I'll see you right back here Monday on NBC News Now. You're going to be in great hands tomorrow night with Aaron Gilchrist, who will be sitting in the hot seat, if you will. Much more to come right here on NBC News Now. We have more coverage picking up right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.